In this video, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what you'll need to do if you're looking at buying a residential investment property in Edmonton or the surrounding areas. So I'm just gonna kind of go off the top of my head on what you should be looking at, especially if it's your first time buying an investment property. There's a few things that you need to figure out to, first of all, see if the property will cash flow and make sure that you're not losing money on it each month. So I'll jump right into it. I'll just kind of rattle some things off, and I'll also give you some tips on how you can do your research to figure out some of these expenses, as well as like what your rent would be for a property. So step one when buying an investment property is going to be figuring out what price point you're buying in. So I'm gonna have to make a few assumptions here, but you should start by getting pre-approved for a mortgage. So I'm assuming you probably already own your own home, and if you're looking at buying an investment property, more than likely it's your second property and you already own one. So just so you know, you're going to need 20% down in most scenarios. Sometimes more. So if you bought your first home and you did 5% down, it's going to be a little bit different for an investment property. It's going to be 20% down if it's going to be used solely as an investment property. So that's your first step, figuring out how much capital you have to work with. That'll be your first limiting factor on what you could afford to purchase as your investment property. Now, you're going to want to go and get pre-approved for a mortgage and find out what you can purchase and what sort of price bracket you're going to be in, because what you can purchase, how much you can afford, is going to affect what type of property and which areas you're looking in, as well as if you have extra capital available to do a renovation, or if you need to buy something that is essentially move-in ready and you can rent it out right away. So I will also mention, I'm assuming that you're looking at a long-term rental property in this video, looking at putting in a long-term tenant, not doing a flip or anything like that. So first step, find out what you can afford. So can you afford to purchase an investment property that's $150,000 or $200,000 or $250,000 or $300,000, $350,000, $400,000, that kind of thing? That's going to be your first limiting factor. If you're looking at buying an investment property in Edmonton, and let's say you can purchase a property up to $200,000, more than likely you're not going to be looking at single family homes or even half duplexes in that price range. You're more than likely going to be looking at townhouses or apartment condos. Unless you go further outside of Edmonton and you get further away, there could be some exceptions to that general idea, but that's going to be your main limiting factor. Now, you can find investment properties, whether it's an apartment condo or a townhouse or a half duplex or detached home. It looks a little bit different for each one, but the process of analyzing it as an investment property is going to be essentially the same. You've got to figure out how much it's going to cost you to purchase that property. So how much do you need for your down payment, and what is your mortgage going to be? And so getting pre-approved for a mortgage, that's going to tell you your max purchase price, but you're also going to see what interest rate that you can get on your mortgage. Obviously, you'll have to decide if you're going to go with variable or fixed. We won't be having a discussion about that today, but let's just assume you're going with a fixed rate and you can get 4.5% on your mortgage. So now if you're looking at a property in the price range of around $200,000, let's say, what your mortgage payment should be based on a purchase price of that amount. So then you've got that piece of information. Now, when you go out and actually start looking at properties online, you can get a lot of the expense information you need just by looking at the property listing. You'll be able to see the price of the listing, obviously, and let's assume you're buying a property that's $200,000. You can go calculate what your mortgage expense will be based on that. You can also look at what your property taxes will be. That should be on the listing, the last year's property tax amount. You can also use some other websites, like there's maps.edmonton.ca, I think it is. You can look at what the tax amount is for a property on there if you can't find it on the listing. And then there's a few other expenses that you're gonna have to figure out as well. You're gonna have to figure out what your insurance expense is going to be, which you can get free quotes online, or basically contact an insurance provider and go through their process. They'll ask you questions about the property, and you can do that to get a quote. Obviously, what your insurance expense is going to vary depending on what type of coverage you get. So you might want loss of rental income coverage, which is going to make your insurance more expensive, but it would cover you, for example, if something happened to the property and now you're not able to collect rent anymore, like if, let's say, there was a fire or something. If you have loss of rental income coverage, the insurance will actually cover the lost rent. Whereas if you don't have that type of coverage, you're going to be out of that money. So that is a risk, and not all insurance companies or policies cover that. So when you're looking at an investment property, that is one type of piece of the insurance coverage that you might want to consider that would be a little bit different than what you would get on your own personal residence, for example. Don't always want to go for the cheapest, because obviously that's going to put you at a higher risk if something goes wrong. So you should understand what your policies are. But basically, in terms of researching your insurance cost, you can just do quotes online. You can talk to insurance brokers and get the quotes and make sure you understand the coverage so that you're comparing things apples to apples. So that's one of the main expenses you're going to be looking at. But let's circle back to one of the main pieces you need to figure out is what you can actually expect to rent that property for. You always need to know that. You don't want to just assume, oh, okay, yeah, I'll be able to get $1,500 for this property. You want to do your research on it, because if you get that wrong, if you assume it's $1,500 and it actually ends up being $1,300 or $1,200, that's going to change the whole cash flow calculation for you. So it is a little time consuming, and it's not a perfect process. It's not quite the same thing as looking at sold comparables for properties. It is a little frustrating, but it is a similar process. So what you want to do is you want to go and you want to research other properties that are being listed for rent that are similar to that. So let's say you find a 3-bedroom, 2-bath townhouse in a certain area. You're going to go on websites like rentfaster.ca. That's one of the best ones for the Edmonton area. You can also go on Facebook Marketplace, Kijiji, Rentboard. There's a bunch of different websites. Rentfaster is probably one of the better ones, and you're going to want to look for active listings that are very similar to yours and start recording what they're renting for. Okay, this one, they're posted for $1,350. This one's posted for $1,400, and it seems very similar, that kind of thing. You can also reach out to some of these rental postings. If they say they've already been rented, you can actually ask them what they've rented it for. So just because it was advertised at $1,350 doesn't mean that's what the landlord got. If you can see that, okay, that one got rented out, you can try contacting them and asking them, okay, did you actually get $1,350 or did you get $1,300, or what did you actually get? And then that's a true comparable, because that's what it got rented for, not just what it was advertised for. That does make it more time consuming as well if you want to go that extra step and actually contact different landlords. Or what you could do if you're going to be doing this over a longer period of time, you could basically write down the contact information of a current rental. Like let's say you see there's an active rental that's listed at $1,350. You can write down the contact information for the landlord. And once you see that that listing has gone away, you can then reach out to them and be like, hey, I'm also a landlord. I'm researching the market, trying to figure out what I could rent my place for. I saw that you had it posted for $1,350. It's gone now. What did you end up renting it for, if you don't mind me asking? And a lot of people will share it with you. You know, not everybody's going to respond, but if you just kind of be honest why you're asking them, and a lot of them will share it with you. And then now you've got an actual better rental comparable, because you're not just going off of the actives, you're actually getting data on what they actually rented for. So if you're really trying to get like really zoned in on what the rental market is, there's no way around it without doing this type of research. And so if you're doing it on your own like that, using websites like that and tracking other active listings that are similar, you should start to get a range on where you think a realistic rent would be. And you should probably be conservative on your estimate when you're doing your cash flow numbers. So next, you're also gonna wanna figure out what your other expenses are. So we talked about insurance. You can do quotes for that. After you've done a few and you're looking at the same type of property, you'll start to know, okay, that's gonna be $50 a month, or that one's gonna be $100 a month. But you have to do that initial research first and get some quotes. You'll also always have the property tax information from the listing. And the other expenses is going to be if there's any condo fees for condo, that'll be on the listing as well. So you're gonna wanna include that. And utilities is something that, depending on how you set up your rental, either you could be paying for those and including those in the rent. That might be more common if you were buying, let's say, a detached home with a basement suite where you've only got one utility bill for both units. It might make more sense for you as the landlord to pay for the utilities and then, you know, split the cost or have a fixed rate for your upstairs and downstairs tenant type thing. That's where you see that it's more common. You could also turn that into a profit center as well. So if you find out your utilities will be approximately, you know, $450 a month for a home like that, maybe you charge the upstairs tenant $300 and the downstairs tenant $200, and now you got like a $50 profit center there as well. So depending on the type of property and how you're setting it up, you would either be paying utilities and then charging the tenant a flat rate, or you would just have the tenant pay for it. If you're buying like an apartment condo or a townhouse or something like that, or just a single unit, it's more likely that you'll get the tenant to pay the utilities, so then it wouldn't be an expense for you. Now the other expenses are going to be your maintenance expense. Usually you would use this as a percentage of your monthly or yearly income. The percentage you use is up to you, and it's going to depend on the age of the property and the condition of the property on how much maintenance it's actually going to need. Obviously, if you're buying a property that's pretty new and it's only, you know, a few years old, you're not going to be spending as much money on maintenance, versus if something's built in the 1970s or the 1950s, like generally, they're going to have a higher maintenance expense. So maybe you use 5% of your monthly income as sort of a maintenance fund, or maybe it's 10% of the rent if it's an older property, for example. But you can research that, and you'll see that different people use different percentages, or if you want, you could use a dollar amount that you're planning on putting aside each month as a maintenance fund, essentially. The other thing that you can use as an expense is your vacancy, and that you're usually also using a percentage as well. So that could be, you know, is it 5%? Are you assuming it's higher? Is it 7 or 8%? That also depends on the property type too. But having that vacancy expense in there is going to help you when you're looking at the cash flow on a long-term basis. Like if you get a tenant in there right away, obviously you're not going to have vacancy losses right away, but as soon as you have to turn that tenant over, you're going to have a period of time between tenants, or if you have to do some work to the property. So there's inevitably will be some vacancy expense for you, even if you get a tenant in there right away. So it's important to put that in there and take a look at it. You can look at what your cash flow numbers look like without a vacancy expense, so that you know, okay, when I actually have a tenant in here, this is what my numbers look like each month. But on the long term, it's important to use a vacancy expense. Now, another thing that you might have as an expense is a property management fee. If you're not managing it yourself, a decent rule of thumb is around 10% of gross rent that you could assume would be your property management expense. This also brings up a good point. So we were talking about figuring out what you could rent a property for. If you're going the property management route, you can lean on a property manager more for this and interview property managers. Most of them will actually come out to a property and they'll analyze it for you and let you know what they think it could rent for. They've got a lot more experience in that since they're in the market on a day-to-day basis. But from my experience, I've seen that a lot of them still do their research a similar way. Like they're going to be looking at what's being posted on rentfaster.ca and other websites like that, and they're trying to figure out, okay, where does this property fit in the market? What could we reasonably expect to get for rent on this? So that would be another research opportunity, is you could do your own research, but you could also talk to property managers and try to get their opinions on what the property would rent for, perhaps even before you actually hire them. Now, if you're hiring a property manager, that's going to be an expense, let's say roughly 10% per month. It could be more, it could be less. Some property managers also charge you for placing tenants while others don't. So that's something that you can look at too. If you're going to be hiring a property manager, maybe they charge you 10% monthly, plus they charge you, you know, half a month's rent to place a tenant, or a flat fee to place a tenant. So you want to figure out how that works once you're analyzing property management companies. So that would be another thing that you'd want to research. If you are hiring a property manager, is you're going to want to research property management companies. Okay, so we talked about insurance, we talked about taxes, property management, vacancy, we've talked about rents. I think we've got most of it covered there. Oh yeah, the mortgage. We did talk about the mortgage. That's gonna be one of your biggest expenses, but basically you're gonna wanna take your total monthly income from rent, and then start subtracting your mortgage, your property management, your vacancy expense, your maintenance expense, insurance expense. I think I said property taxes already. All those expenses that we've talked about, and you're gonna wanna subtract those to see, does this property cash flow? And you might have to do this for multiple properties while you're learning the market. You might find a property that you like, and then you might run the numbers on it after you've researched it and found out what you think it could rent for, and you looked at the expenses, and then you might realize that that price at this more than likely is not going to cash flow. It might be negative $200 a month with current interest rates and what current rents are. So you're going to have to basically keep researching properties, find another one and see, okay, what does this one look like if I research it? And you'll start to learn the market that way and start to figure out what types of properties and which price points and everything actually have a better chance of cash flowing, because it's not going to be every single property. Now, obviously, preferably you want to try to buy a property that is at least cash flow neutral, which would mean that each month after all your expenses, your rent should cover all of your expenses, and then you can just kind of hold on to it and not have to be feeding a bunch of money into that property, because you're putting yourself at an increased risk. If you do have a property that's cash flow negative every month, then you're actually putting money into that property every month. And if something happened to your income, or if that was tight for you, that you could run into problems, especially if you're doing that with multiple rental properties. And if you know, imagine if you had 5 or 10 rental properties that all of them are negative 100 or 200 a month, that's all money that you're feeding into those properties. Yeah, you got your mortgage pay down and they could still be making you money, but you have a potential cash flow problem there. So ideally you wanna try to be at least cash flow neutral, or ideally is actually cash flow positive, because that gives you that wiggle room in case you have some unexpected expenses that are higher than your monthly maintenance fund that you're building there. And if costs go up somehow or rents go down a little bit, you've got some wiggle room there where you can still keep it positive or at least neutral. So those are some things that you're gonna wanna be thinking about if you're looking at buying an investment property in the Edmonton area, or really anywhere, or anywhere in Canada at least. It's a little different down in the States. I am a realtor here in the Edmonton area, and I work in Edmonton and surrounding communities. So if you're looking at buying an investment property and you'd like to get some help with that, that's definitely something I can help you with, and help you work through this process, figuring out, okay, what's your purchase price range based on your pre-approval, and what types of investment properties can we see potentially working for you at that purchase price. So obviously there's a whole bunch more that could be talked about in this topic, and this doesn't cover everything, but just wanted to put this video out there and let you know some of the things that you could be thinking about. You can do a lot of this stuff in a spreadsheet. I do have a spreadsheet I could share with you as well. So if you're interested in analyzing some investment properties and looking at your cash flow numbers, just reach out to me at 780-819-5508, or go to booktrevornow.com, and then you can just select a time on my calendar and then I'll call you. We'll set up a free consultation call. You can let me know what you're looking at doing. We can talk about it, and I can give you some more insights as well. And I can share a spreadsheet with you so that you can use that in your research process. So hopefully that was useful for you guys. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video. If I missed anything, it was off the top of my head, so I wouldn't be shocked if I missed some glaring thing, and we'll find out later. But I'll make more videos about investing in real estate here in the future. But if you click over here, you can subscribe. And if you click over here, you can check out another video on my channel. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.